Welcome back. Hopefully today's video will be a short one. The workbench that I built for myself in the garage didn't have a vise because at the time that I built the workbench, I had no idea what I was doing. It was just a table, basically, that I could lay boards on to saw them or set something on while I assembled it. But eventually, after several years passed and then I watched a few hundred YouTube videos, I decided I wanted a vise, but I didn't want to spend the money for a vise. Obviously, a vise is useful or can be useful for holding something that you need to work on so you don't have to hold it yourself or clamp it down to something. And unlike clamps, a vise can hold something in various positions depending on what you need to do to it. But those heavy metal vises have to be, I guess, attached to a work surface at some place with bolts. And the Moxon Vises, I think is what they're called, are built into the side of the work table, which my work table, as you know, was an amateur table, so it's not equipped for that. But I did see a video about how to make your own DIY Moxon Vise. And I tried it. So here's some footage of me fiddling with the thing that I built. I took a long 2x6 board. I cut a section that was a little bit shorter than my work table. That's the rear section you see here. I cut grooves into it. I cut a little chunk out so there's a place for the clamps to hold that part to the table. And then I cut matching grooves in the other shorter part that just fits onto the side of it. And basically you just match up the grooves with the grooves on the other one and then slide a clamp in sideways in through those grooves. F-style clamps, so they'll have the thin metal bar that will fit in there. You put your workpiece in the middle and then you tighten up those clamps. It actually works pretty well. Its stability is dependent upon the stability of the table, which would be the same for any other vise, obviously, that's attached to a work table. If the table wiggles, the vise is going to wiggle with the table. That's the same with this one, but otherwise it's very stable. One problem I had is because of how deep those 2x6s are, is that if I put a small workpiece in the top, then the vise would, not quite hold it right, so I'd have to put a matching width piece in the bottom. But I later realized that if I could change the groove where those F-style clamps go in, then the clamps could come up diagonally, and then the pressure would be right next to the workpiece. So here is some footage of me knocking out some material. I drilled an extra hole there nearby, and then I used a chisel and hammer. I used a rasp to change the shape of those grooves so that would allow the metal bar in the F clamp to rotate so that the pressure from the clamp would be closer to the top of the vise, which is where the workpiece is being held. That way I wouldn't have to put the matching workpiece in the bottom. And this is me putting it back together, and you can see what I mean about the F clamps being diagonal so that the pressure is up near the top, and it can hold a workpiece fairly steady, and I'm using a small block plane to test on a scrap piece of wood. And you can see the table wiggling, but that's the table's fault, not the vise's fault. So I think that board cost, like a 10-foot 2x6 board, cost something like $5 or $6. And of course I already had the table, the clamps, and the block plane on hand. So now when I do need to plane a piece of wood that's that will fit in that vise, I can do it. I'm pretty happy with it so far, but just like any DIY thing like this, like a circular saw guide or whatever, it has to be stored somewhere when you're not using it. But this one, unlike an actual vise that's attached to part of your table, you just loosen those clamps and take those two boards and set them someplace, and they're ready to use anytime that you need to hold a workpiece. Hopefully that was helpful to any of you that have maybe seen one of those videos where somebody made one of these and you were curious as to whether it works for somebody like ourselves. Mine's not perfect. I don't have a table saw, so the lines of the cuts are not perfect. I did all the cuts on this with hand saws, and even the cuts that I made those grooves with, I did with hand saws and then smoothed them out with chisels, rasps, and so on. But it works great for the limited purposes that I need it for. If you're going to be working with hand tools every day and, that's going to be your thing, then, maybe get an actual vise. But for somebody like me who's going to need to plane something, 4 or 5 times a year, this, I think, is a much better and cost-effective solution. Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.